Ethan opened his laptop late at night, expecting nothing more than a few routine emails. Instead, he found a single message from his wife, Emily. No greeting. No explanation. Just a cold declaration that she had filed for separation and that all communication must now be in writing. For a moment, the room felt impossibly still, as if the world had paused to watch his reaction. But Ethan didn't break. He steadied his breath, closed his eyes, and forced logic to take control. He notified the mediator, shut down their shared credit line, and removed Emily from his company's emergency contacts. Each action was precise, controlled, almost surgical. He believed he was protecting himself. He believed he was simply following her rules. But in reality, Ethan had just lit the first spark of a storm neither of them could stop. The incident began on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind where nothing feels important until everything suddenly is. Emily had shown up at Ethan's company for a brief meeting with a colleague, determined to keep her personal life sealed off from anyone connected to him. She walked through the lobby with the same cool confidence she had been carrying ever since the separation email, but fate didn't seem interested in her desire for control. While stepping out of the elevator, her heels slipped on the metal threshold. She fell hard, the sound sharp enough to send the receptionist running. Within minutes, HR was on the scene, calling an ambulance and trying to contact her emergency person. That was when the first crack in her perfectly constructed wall of privacy appeared. Emily's first message hit Ethan's phone before she was even discharged from the hospital. The notification lit up his screen in a harsh, vibrating burst, but he didn't open it. Instead, he let the phone rest on his desk while he continued reviewing a project report, forcing himself to stay calm and detached. But more notifications followed, one after another. Short, angry, escalating. When he finally opened the thread, the screen filled instantly with accusations. Emily blamed him for everything. For her fall. For her mother's panic. For the humiliation of having her personal life exposed by a company she never wanted to walk into again. She wrote that he was cold, vindictive, and deliberately cruel, twisting his logical decisions into weapons she insisted he had used against her. Ethan read every word slowly, letting each line settle into the quiet anger she was trying to provoke. But he didn't reply. Not a single sentence. Her messages grew more frantic when she switched topics. She had discovered the shared credit account had been closed. The one Ethan shut down the day she demanded separation and privacy. The one she had planned to use to put down a deposit for the new apartment she wanted to move into with Nathan, though she never admitted that part outright. Her tone shifted from rage to desperation. She called him selfish. She called him controlling. She accused him of sabotaging her ability to start fresh. Ethan leaned back in his chair and exhaled. It was painfully clear she didn't want communication. She wanted conflict. She wanted him angry, reactive, unstable. But Ethan remembered her very first rule. Only written communication. And he intended to honor it word for word, but not in the way she expected. He selected the entire message thread and forwarded it to the mediator with a brief note. No commentary. No emotion. Just evidence. He knew she would hate that more than any reply he could ever craft. Because silence speaks differently when every message becomes part of a legal record. Meanwhile, Emily's emotional spiral only intensified. Her messages became longer, filled with half-arguments and half-confessions she likely didn't mean to reveal. She contradicted herself repeatedly, claiming she wanted distance, but also demanding explanations. Asking for privacy, but insisting Ethan should have known what she wanted without her saying it. Ethan watched the contradictions stack up like fragile pieces of glass, each one reflecting her growing loss of control. After nearly an hour of silence from him, Emily sent one final message. It was shorter than the others. Sharper. More deliberate. You always pretend to be the calm one. Fine. Let's see how calm you stay when I come for what's mine. Ethan stared at the line for a long moment. Then he locked his phone, placed it face down on the table, and returned to his work. He didn't know exactly what she meant, but he could feel it. The cold anger. The unraveling. The start of a conflict that was no longer just emotional, but strategic, dangerous, and inevitable. It started on a quiet Thursday afternoon when Ethan heard a knock at his door that made him pause. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not Emily. Not her sister. Not anyone connected to the chaos that had consumed his life for the past few weeks. But the knock came again, louder this time, demanding attention. Through the peephole, he saw Emily and her sister standing on the porch. Their expressions were a mixture of anger and impatience. Emily's eyes flashed with the same intensity he had read in her messages, but now it was no longer filtered through a screen. It was raw, immediate, physical. Ethan straightened. He had anticipated this confrontation, but he reminded himself of the rules, her rules. Every communication had to be in writing. Every request had to go through email. He would not step outside that boundary, no matter how loud the pounding or how harsh the accusations became. They began shouting through the door, accusing him of everything from negligence to intentional harm. Emily insisted that he had caused her injuries, that he had orchestrated her fall, that he was deliberately blocking her access to their shared life. Her sister chimed in, adding threats and warnings that Ethan had no intention of answering. He kept silent. He stayed calm. He refused to let them see that their presence rattled him. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Eventually, they left the porch but continued their attack through other channels. Emily sent a carefully crafted email listing every item she intended to retrieve from the house. Ethan opened it slowly, reading line by line. The list was extensive, valuable, and revealing. She had included personal items, shared assets, and even things with sentimental value, proof she was thinking strategically, almost preemptively, before the legal system could intervene. He noted each item, photographing them and arranging them in separate boxes. He replied only with one line, confirmation that the request would be handled according to her own rules, via written correspondence. There was no emotion, no commentary, no retaliation. Every action was calculated, deliberate. Every response was evidence. Emily's next emails shifted tone slightly, oscillating between anger and veiled threats, testing the boundaries he had set. She was probing, trying to provoke a reaction he had carefully withheld. But Ethan stayed meticulous, documenting every interaction. Each message, each accusation, each claim of injury or wrongdoing became part of a chronological record he knew would be invaluable later. As the evening descended, Ethan reviewed the day's events and realized one thing clearly. This confrontation had not been about retrieving belongings. It had been a test, a challenge, a demonstration of Emily's willingness to bend rules, to manipulate emotions, to assert control through chaos. And for the first time, he understood the stakes not only legally, but personally. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. The house was quiet again. For now. But he knew this was only the beginning. The emails, the confrontations, the calculated moves, they were all steps toward something larger, something inevitable. And Ethan was ready. He would not allow his composure to falter. He would not allow emotion to guide his actions. Every move, every decision, every response would be precise. Because he knew that the real battle was just beginning, and the house, the possessions, and even Emily's fury were merely the surface of what was to come. The morning arrived, with an unusual tension in the air. Ethan had been expecting Emily and her sister, but nothing prepared him for the vehicle they arrived in. A large moving truck rumbled up the driveway, its presence signaling far more than a simple visit. And then he saw him, Nathan, Emily's new partner, standing beside the truck with an expression of smug confidence. It was clear they intended to take everything. Ethan met them at the door, calm and composed as always. He watched Emily step out, her eyes scanning the house as if marking her territory. Her sister followed, carrying a clipboard and muttering instructions. Nathan lingered by the truck, arms crossed, exuding the kind of overconfidence that comes from believing the law and morals are on your side. But Ethan had prepared. Boxes were labeled and organized. Valuable items and personal possessions belonging to Emily were separated and documented. Two friends stood by as witnesses, cameras set up to capture every interaction. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply followed the plan. Everything would be legal, everything would be recorded. The initial hours passed with tense efficiency. Emily moved through the house, carefully selecting items from her list, but Ethan made sure nothing crossed the boundaries established by the law. Furniture, electronics, personal belongings, everything was accounted for. And then he saw it. The one item Emily wanted above all. The Wanderer, the statue from their honeymoon, a symbol of the life they once shared. Ethan blocked her path. He explained calmly that the statue could not leave the house, that it was part of the shared property under legal consideration, and that taking it without authorization would be considered destruction of property. For a brief moment, Emily froze, as if she understood the gravity of the situation. Then, in a sudden burst of rage, she grabbed the statue and smashed it against the floor. The sound of shattering echoed through the room, sharp and final. Nathan and her sister stared, shocked. Ethan's friends, positioned as witnesses, recorded every second. Emily's anger was raw, uncontrollable, undeniable. She had crossed a line she could not undo. And in that moment, everything shifted. The balance of power changed, evidence was set, and the legal implications became clear. Emily continued packing a few remaining items, but her composure had fractured. Her sister tried to calm her, but the damage was done. Ethan remained calm, documenting everything. He boxed up the remaining items, separating what belonged to Emily, what belonged to him, and ensuring the witnesses captured every detail. He did not gloat. He did not argue. He simply followed the plan, knowing that the law would now reflect the actions taken in that room. By the time the truck drove away, the house was mostly empty. Emily had taken some belongings, Nathan had witnessed the chaos, and her sister was exhausted from the confrontation. Ethan closed the door behind them, looking at the fragments of the Wanderer on the floor. He knew the video captured would be the turning point in the entire separation. A symbol of rage, loss of control, and the consequences of acting impulsively. Everything had been prepared, everything had been documented, and the legal path forward was now clear. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself a quiet breath, knowing that while the day had been emotionally draining, the future was firmly in his hands. The video of Emily smashing, the Wanderer, became the centerpiece of the legal proceedings. The court watched in silence as the fragments of the statue lay scattered across the floor, each piece a testament to her anger and impulsiveness. The judge's expression was unreadable, but the implication was clear. This was not a minor incident. It was deliberate, malicious, and damaging. Ethan's attorney presented the evidence systematically, showing the careful documentation of every item, every email, and every action Emily had taken leading up to the day. The closure of the shared credit account, the meticulous records of her possessions, and the witness testimonies painted a complete picture of the events. Emily's actions were no longer just emotional reactions. They were strategic decisions with consequences she could not evade. The court ruled in Ethan's favor. He was allowed to purchase the house at a price below market value, securing the stability he had fought to maintain. Emily lost her claim to several high-value shared assets, a devastating blow to her plans. Her closed credit line meant that financial strategies she had relied upon, including her business ambitions with Nathan, collapsed before they could even take root. The ripple effects were immediate. Nathan, who had been present during the moving day chaos, faced scrutiny in his professional life. His association with Emily and the reckless behavior captured on video tarnished his reputation. Potential clients and partners viewed him as unreliable, unprofessional, and connected to instability. Emily herself found doors closing, opportunities disappearing, and support dwindling. Her plans to start fresh and gain financial advantage had failed spectacularly. Meanwhile, Ethan's life began to stabilize. He maintained control over his property and finances, and the legal victory ensured he could rebuild without the constant threat of impulsive interference. The documentation he had carefully kept proved invaluable, demonstrating foresight, patience, and restraint in contrast to Emily's destructive choices. He retained his dignity, his assets, and a clear path forward. In private, Ethan reflected on the chain of events. The months of tension, careful planning, and emotional restraint had paid off. Every message he forwarded to the mediator, every record he kept, every boundary he enforced contributed to a legal outcome that favored fairness and justice. Emily's temper and reckless decisions, amplified by her sense of betrayal and anger, had undermined her own position completely. The case became a cautionary tale in their circle and beyond. It highlighted how deliberate documentation, adherence to legal boundaries, and emotional control can outweigh impulsive action and unchecked rage. Ethan's preparation and calm had turned a potentially volatile situation into a clear legal victory. Emily's destruction of the statue, once an impulsive act of defiance, became the key moment that sealed her losses. By the end of the proceedings, it was clear that Ethan would emerge with both financial security and personal stability. Emily and Nathan faced not only material loss, but reputational damage that would follow them for years. The law had intervened, guided by evidence and deliberate action, and the consequences of impulsive behavior had never been more apparent. Ethan's foresight, patience, and adherence to principles ensured that justice, in the form of tangible and lasting outcomes, had been served. Emily had hoped that the legal process would grant her the upper hand, that her emotional appeals and her claims for long-term support would secure the resources she felt entitled to. She arrived at the mediation with confidence, certain that her arguments would persuade the court. But Ethan was prepared. He presented evidence that left little room for doubt or interpretation. The most damning piece was the registration of the business domain. Ethan showed that Emily and Nathan had registered a company domain 3 months before her separation email, a clear indication that she had been planning her financial exit well in advance. This documentation shattered her claims of needing extensive support, proving that the move had been premeditated and financially calculated. The mediator examined the timeline and the correspondence. Every forwarded message, every email request, and every recorded incident of property destruction reinforced Ethan's case. Emily's credibility was questioned. Her intentions were no longer portrayed as genuine need, but as a calculated plan to benefit herself and Nathan at Ethan's expense. The ruling was decisive. Emily was granted only a modest recovery allowance for 2 years, far below what she had anticipated. Her plans for long-term financial security were effectively dismantled. She had aimed to secure wealth, assets, and independence immediately following the separation, but every attempt had been undercut by the evidence Ethan had meticulously preserved. The financial implications were severe. Emily lost her claims to valuable shared property, and her access to the previously shared credit lines was permanently revoked. The business ventures she had hoped to launch with Nathan faced immediate obstacles. Without capital, without access, and with legal documentation proving her prior intentions, the prospects for success were bleak. Emotionally, the defeat was crushing. Emily had underestimated the power of foresight, preparation, and calm decision-making. She had relied on impulse, anger, and her perception of entitlement. Ethan's strategic patience and adherence to rules ensured that every one of her moves could be countered, documented, and ultimately used against her. Nathan, too, faced fallout. His association with Emily in both personal and business endeavors was scrutinized. Opportunities he had planned for himself dissolved as potential partners, reconsidered his judgment and reliability. The ripple effects of the legal outcome extended beyond Emily, affecting the lives of those who had aligned with her ambitions. By the end of the proceedings, Emily was left with very little. 2 years of minimal support, no claim to major assets, and a legal record that documented her impulsive and destructive behavior. All her carefully laid plans for wealth, security, and leverage had collapsed. The evidence Ethan had preserved, combined with his measured and rational approach, had turned the tide completely. As she left the mediation, Emily realized that the separation was not only a legal defeat, but a personal and financial failure. Everything she had counted on, impulse, anger, secrecy, had worked against her. Ethan had anticipated her every move, and the consequences were clear. Her strategies had failed, her future was constrained, and her ambitions were curtailed. The final outcome was undeniable. Ethan had regained control, stability, and security, while Emily's plans had unraveled completely. 8 months had passed since the final ruling, and life had settled into a new rhythm for Ethan. The house was quiet, orderly, and under his control. He had reclaimed his routines, his finances, and a sense of stability that had seemed impossible during the chaos of the separation. The legal battles and confrontations were behind him, leaving only lessons and memories. Emily and Nathan struggled to adjust to their new reality. The apartment they rented was small and cramped, a stark contrast to the ambitions they had once envisioned. Opportunities they had counted on vanished, and their reputations had been tarnished by the very actions they had believed would secure their advantage. Each day was a reminder of the consequences of impulsive decisions and unchecked anger. Ethan walked through the house one evening and stopped before a small box on the shelf. Inside were the shattered pieces of the Wanderer. He held them gently, a silent acknowledgement of the storm that had passed. The fragments symbolized the destruction necessary for change, a reminder that some things must break to allow for rebuilding. He placed the pieces back in the box and set it down. Ethan knew life would continue, steady and controlled, shaped by the choices he had made. The chaos was over, the legal battles resolved, and the path ahead was clear. Sometimes, loss and destruction paved the way for peace and stability, and now he could finally move forward.